back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Yes, I'm wearing my Costas shirt. I snuck the Costas on Monday night. I ate a crab cake left over on Tuesday night because I couldn't eat it because I got the seafood platter and the orange ruffy was delicious and the scallops. I had fried shrimp. I think for the last time I had fried shrimp, I was with Luke in New Orleans 8 years ago or something. Just delicious. I'm going to get the white Costas. And Pete told me this is the special one. This is the 50th anniversary if I turn around on it. He's like, you got the special one. I'm like, I want the white one. The yellow one makes me look like I'm rooting for Mitch Trubisky somewhere in Mount Lebanon. The Maryland Lottery presents our Maryland Crab Cake Tour, as well as our friends at Goodwill Industries. I want to give them a shout out, give them some massive love as well, as we will be at Costas on Friday, enjoying everything but March Madness involving us. All we got is hating on Duke or hating on, pick the coach you don't like. Pick the Big Ten team you don't like if you have such a thing as Big Ten angst. I think we're lacking Big Ten angst around here. We don't even hate Penn State the way we ought. Luke Jones joins us now. He will not be with us on Friday, even though we'll have lots of celebrities and luminaries and fun people. And there's a word, by the way, Luke, if there's anything I can do to get you to Costas, there's a word that Pete and I are going to have a little Bobby Flay thing going on. I have this crab imperial crab melt thing that I want him to do with an English muffin and add it to the menu because it's like the most delicious thing ever. It was from Burke's. And we are going to replicate that. So food, fun, baseball's in season. And now you're going to tell me that the Ravens tampered a little bit. They got involved in the tampering here last 48 hours, huh?
Yeah, I mean, they're the only ones, right? I mean, but yeah, you talked about Costas. It'd be great if I could just get the Ravens to stop making moves. But certainly I don't think Ravens fans want to hear that after a really quiet day on Monday. Tuesday, not so quiet. And
that's sneaky Eric DeCosta.
That's to be expected. And let's be very clear. I mean, they're paying a lot for Marcus Williams, a safety who is really highly regarded around the league.
He's Ed Reed to them, right? He better be he better be really good.
No one's Ed Reed, but I will say this. And for someone who was most famously known as a rookie for being on the wrong end of the Minneapolis Miracle, he was the one who missed the tackle on Stephon Diggs in the 2017 divisional round. But the fact that he gets a 5-year, $70 million contract a few years later really speaks to the development he's had. And he was a second-round pick out of Utah. I mean, it's not as though he was an unknown coming out of the draft. But
some people thought he was a first-round pick too, by the way. Some people did. Yeah.
No question about it. So he's not a household name. He hasn't made the Pro Bowls, which we know how that works, Nestor. I mean, how many guys for the Ravens
Weddle in the Pro Bowl for playing 4 games last year because he's Eric Weddle, right? Like that's the way he even play.
But we know in so many cases. I mean, Haloti Ngata was a great example of this. I can think of some other guys who played for the Ravens where they kind of become a Pro Bowl player a couple years before they actually make the Pro Bowl, right? I mean, it really becomes a case of reputation. Word spreads around the league. You start to become known among the brethren of players. Other coaches around the league start to notice you. But I think you go back to really the last 10 years, Nestor. I mean, look at how much they've tried to do to address the safety position from the moment Ed Reed decided he was going to join the Houston Texans, and the Ravens were saying, well, we love you, Ed. You're a Hall of Famer. You're one of the best players in the history of the franchise, but you're not the same guy anymore. And we're not going to pay you like the Texans are. God bless you. And we saw how that worked out. He got a nice payday. The Texans got nothing, as far as what they paid for, because it wasn't Ed Reed anymore. And they
kind of like the Ravens after Vinny, right? Or after Dilfer even. Like it was just a bunch of guys before they could get a guy, right?
No doubt. I mean, you go down the list, Matt Elam and Michael Huff was the first veteran they signed. Matt Elam they drafted. Terrence Brooks they drafted it the year after that. Go down the list of Darian Stewart and Kendrick Lewis and Will Hill. And finally, they do find someone in Eric Weddle who did a nice job for a couple years. But you look at by and large, it's been a mixed bag at best. I mean, and that might be the kind way to describe it. I mean, Tony Jefferson, loved the person. Player wasn't bad, certainly wasn't a player who matched what his compensation was. And of course, that brings us back towards the presence.
By the way, Chuck Clark's been a good player.
Well, sure, but he was also a 6th-round pick. I mean, he wasn't drafted to be, quote, the guy. You draft a safety in the 6th round, you're thinking, okay, special teams contributor, maybe our third safety, maybe he plays in some quarter packages. But you're right, he turned out nice, and there's no question about that. That was a very
I'll give you Will
good
Dempst too.
pick.
20 years later, I'll give you 5 minutes with Will Dempst too. How about that?
Well, but I'm talking post Ed Reed though. I mean, Dewan
I'm just
Landry
thinking
was a
of
good.
guys that, well, I mean, they moved Ladarius later on, right? Like
Sure,
Rod Woodson, all of that, right? So
sure.
you could talk about that, but having a premier player at that position, they paid Earl Thomas to be that guy, and he wasn't. And now they're paying this guy to be a game changer. Like, and they envision Humphrey and they envision Peters, and this on the back end, they prefer this probably to Bobby Wagner, right?
I mean, to Bobby Wagner, yeah. I mean, certainly we can debate a pass rusher. I mean, you look at, and I said this to you in our previous conversation, I really like the deal that Hassan Reddick signed with the Eagles, but he's also a Philadelphia. He's from that area. Would he have given that deal to the Ravens necessarily or someone else? We don't know that. I know he's been on that, or they've been in on him in the past. But I think what you look to, and you just said his name, most of the time, and we talked about this with Jacksonville, all the spending they did on day one. I mean, so much money in contracts anyway. I mean, we'll see how many dollars are actually exchanged before it's all said and done. But free agency is really about righting wrongs in the draft or other mistakes, other injuries that you have to account for. I mean, that's really where you fill your needs. The draft is really where you want to get the best value, draft the best player available, right? I mean, there's so much of that. And yes, need's always part of it, but this is a case of righting the wrong of what happened 3 years ago, giving Earl Thomas the contract they did, which was 4 years, $55 million, and it was an absolute disaster. He wasn't terrible on the field in 2019 by any means. He played well. Did he play at the level of his contract and what he had been in Seattle? No. And then, of course, the off-field stuff, concerns and things that have come out since then.
Earl Thomas was a mess of a human being. I mean, let's just call it, this is a human story. It's a human. It's an employment issue when you can't get along with when nobody in the building wants you there, and because you feel like every day you show up at work, you make them feel like you don't want to be there, or you got an axe to grind, or you had something like that, and that was kind of shocking, especially Eric's big splash, and that came under some duress, right? That came under some people leaving. C.J. Mosley, like it was a mess of a couple of days, and I think Eric will look at that and say, of all the things, I mean, I know Eric looks over 25 years of this and says there were draft picks, guys he missed on, guys he really believed in that didn't make it or whatever.
Yeah.
But missing on a $55 million contract on a guy who some people thought was going to the Hall of Fame. He probably is now, but that he was on that path to pick up where Weddle, where hopefully Calais Campbell thinks he is, or any of these veteran, Matt Burke. We talk about these guys that came and shined. Earl Thomas is the poster child for what not to do if you're Eric DeCosta. And Eric wears that. Eric remembers, He doesn't want you to forget Earl Thomas. He wants you to remember, and then he remembers it and says, this can't be that. And so for him to sign his name on this couple years later, and a guy that's a ball hawk, right? Like this is a game. This guy should be the best player on their defense, right? Probably. Maybe.
I still think you look at Marlon Humphrey, I mean, and obviously you hope Odafe Owe becomes a Pro Bowl caliber guy. I mean, you have no idea right now. I'm not saying he is, but
he's not a $70 million player right now, right? We would, right? Nobody would give him that money.
He's not now. Right. But right. Well, of course. I mean, I'm just saying, as far as that tier of guys that you're looking to be the next leaders on your defense, the next cornerstones of your defense. And, in Marcus Williams' case, look, is he a ball hawk in the way that you viewed Ed Reed 10, 15 years ago? Of course not. He's not. I'm not sure Ed Reed is that guy in today's game because of, in terms of just the sheer numbers he would put up, because it's different. It's way more difficult for the defense. But he is a guy over his 5 years, 15 interceptions, so he's averaged 3 interceptions per season, 38 pass breakups. So he's got his hand on a lot of footballs, and he's made plays in deep coverage. I think as much as we talk about righting the wrong of Earl Thomas, and even 2 years ago, when you look at how well Deshaun Elliott played stepping into that role, Deshaun Elliott was never available. I mean, that's just the truth. He couldn't stay on the field. So as much as maybe you thought, okay, he looks like he could be a starting caliber safety, it's a moot point when he can't stay on the football field. And you feel for the guy, but that's not someone you can commit to. So you look at Marcus Williams, played on the franchise tag a year ago, played well. Pro Football Focus and a lot of the analytics sites really like him. I saw Matt Bowen, one of the guys who's on NFL Matchup for ESPN, former NFL player who's a film junkie, breaking down some tape and talking about Marcus Williams making plays in deep coverage. I mean, this is a guy who is a true free safety. Now, how the Ravens use him and the way that the Ravens like to have interchangeable parts with their safeties and move guys around, I'm sure he'll do some different things. But he was largely a deep free safety and playing in zone coverage and making plays on the football and seeing him break up passes 35 yards downfield. I mean, the kind of things that you remember Ed Reed doing. So is he going to be Ed Reed? No, I don't think you can put that burden on any player. I mean, even a guy that wouldn't have been fair to put it on Earl Thomas, even, quite frankly, if we're looking at it in hindsight, strictly talking from a football standpoint. But this is clearly someone they have high expectations on. And I'll go back to a theme you and I have talked about for a number of years now. From an analytics standpoint, valuing secondary play, it's very clear the Ravens have valued their secondary. And, you look at the contracts they've given out over the last 6 or 7 years, even, ones like Tony Jefferson, which I didn't love that deal at the time. I didn't think he was what they advertised him to be. And as much as I like him as a person and like him as a locker room guy and wasn't a bad football player, probably wasn't the contract that was appropriate to give a player.
He wasn't a game-changing signing,
exactly.
Even though he was signed in this minute at this time to be a lockdown guy.
Right, exactly. I mean, and I think here's the difference. I want to say Tony Jefferson had 3 career interceptions at that point in his career. The numbers suggested he wasn't that guy that they were advertising him to be or hoping him to become. So in the case of Marcus Williams, and I even have been debating some people on Facebook or Twitter or what have you. I saw a couple people say, well, this guy's not Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams, I think, only has 4 or 5 interceptions in his career. I mean, for as much as he got hyped so much with the Jets over his first couple years, he hasn't been that guy that. Now, he does a lot of other things and he moves around a lot and he's a little more of a chess piece, a Swiss Army knife. But, for Marcus Williams, he's that deep safety to make plays on the football. So that's the expectation. The pressure will be on him, but he's 6'1", 195 pounds. He turns 26 in September, Nestor. I mean, this is a guy that you still view as being an ascending player, a guy that's still getting better, a guy that's just entering his prime now. So to the point you made, while I wouldn't necessarily view him as saying, okay, he's absolutely their best player now, he's certainly right there with Marlon Humphrey, right there with some of your recent first-round picks that you're hoping will pop and become that guy over the next year or two. But the expectations are certainly high, and hey, this is an unrestricted free agent. This wasn't a guy who was cut. We typically talk about those Kevin Zeitler type signings where it's someone who's cut, or or look at someone like J.C. Treader from the Browns who just got cut. If the Ravens are looking for a center and Bradley Bozeman's still out there, don't
stigmatize the guys that get cut now. They get cut because they have their cap numbers wrong in a lot of cases, and in a lot of cases they get cut because they want to leave. Baker Mayfield wrote a note on Tuesday night, like it looks like he just wants out now. He's pissed. So these guys that want to leave and stuff. But I'm with you. Luke Jones is here, Baltimore Luke. You can of course follow him through all of our podcasts. He's monitoring all things Ravens and free agency and Orioles. And if there's any other breaking news, you'll get it first on the WNST Tech Service. Brought to you by Coons Ford Security Boulevard. I want to say this about Eric, because the owner doesn't speak anymore. The coach speaks so much that he doesn't speak so much anymore. He's better off season than he is in season. So I'm looking forward to next week. I will be down in Palm Beach for the owners meetings, sort of catching up, meeting Sashi Brown. We're going to be covering the Ravens unlike anybody else. Don't worry. It's what we do around here. Eric has a presser. And it's funny because I was going through my Facebook and I saw that picture I took with, the seat in the way. It was the first time we were in the auditorium in a couple of years. And he says a lot of things. And he's a little nervous in the beginning, and then he winds up just being Eric, and he's very good at it, and he's very honest, and he's very, very astute about all of this, and he's very measured. And he says things, and then you go back, like last year, I love my wide receivers. I love my wide receivers. And we're like, we all call bullshit on that, right? And then he drafts wide receiver, right? And apparently led some other of our competitors astray. And then this press conference, he talks about, we got to go get the ball. We got to go get the ball. We got to go get the ball. If we were tea leaf readers, and I think we got there with Bisciotti after a dozen years of doing it. DaCosta doesn't speak much, and when he does, it's a little bit like the guy you invest the money with. When he speaks, you listen a little bit, and then you go back a few weeks later, and you can either talk about the wide receivers and the misinformation or disinformation last year that we all sort of read through, or you could also say that we might get after the quarterback, right? Tyus Bowser might pressure the quarterback. Adafi Owe might pressure the quarterback. We might have Justin Houston. We might sign some other pass rusher. But you can't have a might on the back end. We had mites on the back end the last 8 weeks of the year, and that didn't go well. That's why you pay Marcus Peters. That's why you pay Marlon Humphrey. That's why if Tavon Young can't get to the field, you can't or Deshaun Elliott, you can't have it. And I think that they view this, and there must be some analytical play here for Eric to be throwing all this money, that there's something about their formula that dictates half the quarterbacks in the league aren't going to let us sack them because they're going to get rid of the ball. So, and we need to make sure that we're locked down on the back end. And this much money being appropriated to that says that that is ultimately the defense. The defense is the secondary. The defense isn't let's sack the quarterback, because most of the time the quarterback's going to have his way to some degree by design, especially when it's Tom Brady and he's 45 years old. And they're not designing plays where he gets sacked. He's not taking 7-step drops and letting you count 5 and 6 Mississippi and hang out with him like it's 1978. That's not the way this works. So spending this money on the back from an analytical end, and to your point, saying we need to touch the ball. The defense needs to take the ball. That's how we win football games. And you can speak to that because you're more into the analytics than I am.
Yeah, I mean, the great analytics debate of the last few years has been valuing coverage before pressure. You want both. Let's be very clear. This isn't to say that you don't need pass rushers at all and you just line up, Jalen Ferguson and a 30-something Pernell McPhee on the edges, and that's going to be good enough. But you just said it. Quarterbacks get rid of the ball so quickly. I think there are a lot of pass rushers in this league who are paid to be great and they're merely good, or paid to be elite and they're more in that good to really good stage. There are guys that are paid to be good and probably average, and probably some of their sack numbers are inflated by scheme and lining up opposite someone else. And look, if the Ravens could get Aaron Donald, God bless, go get him. I mean, if the Ravens could get a Von Miller who's 5 years younger, get him. I already said I like the
Mack was available the other day.
I liked the Hassan Reddick deal for the Eagles. I mean, there were guys out there. Emmanuel Ogbah mentioned before he re-signed with Miami that he mentioned that the Ravens were a team that were sniffing around, even though that was before the tampering period. So hint, hint, wink, wink. It tells you how this stuff all goes.
Pat Moriarty doesn't work that way.
I mean, and it wasn't just the Ravens. I mean, all these teams do this, to be very clear. But the point is, if you have to choose one or the other, and again, that's not to say the Ravens shouldn't be trying to get signs at Zadarius Smith and bring him back if the price is right, or whoever else you want to throw out there. Or I mean, this draft is considered pretty adept in terms of edge rushers. So certainly that's something they need to be looking to. But they talk about coverage being a little more reliable in terms of value on your football team, whereas pass rush can be a little more frenetic. You can have that guy who has that 12-sack season that when you start to dive into it, maybe wasn't quite as great and it was more opportunistic. And then the next year, he only has 5.5 sacks. So again, that's not to say that that's the only way to do it or the absolute right way to do it. That's the way the Ravens have approached it in recent years. And I'll remind everyone, as much as you want to talk about the lack of pass rush last year, and sure, that hurt them, the Ravens gave up more big pass plays than anyone in football last year. And big part of that was, as much as Chuck Clark and Deshaun Elliott gave them some really high floor play the previous year, The numbers were suggested they weren't getting their hands on many footballs. And then last year, it completely fell apart. Deshaun Elliott gets hurt. Brandon Stevens, who now can slide into a hybrid role, he might be their slot corner. He's going to be their third safety. He's going to be that hybrid tight end matchup guy potentially. He can
Tavon
be
Young
that
kind of role in there.
I mean, he's a different. I mean, he's a different body type,
yeah.
but he could be that guy that moves around. And now you're not looking at him having to be a starting safety in year two. Safety is a tricky position from a developmental standpoint. I mean, for every Ed Reed who keep in mind, Ed Reed was what, 23, 24 years old when he came in the league. He was an older rookie, and he stepped into a system and a defense that had some other veteran players already established. One of them named Ray Lewis. That certainly helps. But Ed was an enigma in the way that he could come in and be a star from day one. Safety is typically a position where it's a little more up and down. Marcus Williams is a great example of this. I already mentioned the Minneapolis Miracle to end his rookie season. He gave that up. So
you got a lot of things happening with quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers in regard to schemes that are meant to confuse you. They're meant to confuse you, and you're in the middle. When you're out on the edge, you sort of know where you are. One step of a wrong turn, and Hollywood Brown really embarrasses you.
Yeah, I'm glad you just said that because it's a very simplistic example that I use, but if an edge rusher slips and falls down, okay. If a running back runs to his side, that might lead to a 13-yard run or might lead to the quarterback getting out and scrambling for a first down, but it's typically not going to result in a touchdown. If a safety in middle third of the field coverage or deep coverage falls down, there's a pretty good chance that's a touchdown. I mean, unless you have great pass rushers.
You fall down on Mark Andrews, he's going to the post.
Right. So, I mean, it very much is a case of it's all give take. The secondary is helped out by a good pass rush. A pass rush is helped out by a good secondary. So, it's always that. So, hey, it's a big commitment here. And Marcus Williams, there are a lot of expectations here. 5 years, $70 million. That's he needs to come in and be a Pro Bowl, all pro caliber player. And even though he hasn't received those accolades yet, you look at some of the people who watch tape on the regular, film junkies, PFF type sites, analytics sites, and they all say that he has played, hovered around being a top 5 caliber safety over the last couple of years. So that needs to translate from New Orleans to Baltimore now, but very much something that they felt was a great opportunity, and they won the bidding. It sounded like Philadelphia and some other teams were in on Marcus Williams, but the Ravens make that happen. And be remiss, I know don't have a ton of time here as we kind of get back to the grind of free agency and the start of the new league year, but Ravens also add Morgan Moses, right tackle, not necessarily a guy who's going to back up Ronnie Stanley extensively if necessary, but is someone who has made some spot starts at left tackle. And I think he very clearly comes in now, becomes a right tackle. Juwan James, Patrick McCary, more in swing tackle reserve type roles. McCary could be their starting center. I mean, who knows how that's going to play out? We know he can play on the inside, but I feel good about this. I'm gonna pat myself on the back on a very rare occasion here. I asked 2 big questions during Eric DeCosta's press conference. One was about offensive tackle and the Ronnie Stanley situation. They signed Morgan Moses late Tuesday night. Even though he's not a left tackle, he's still an upgraded right tackle. And I also asked about safety and more playmaking ability in the back end of the defense. And they signed Marcus Williams. Now, I was surprised about Marcus Williams. I didn't think they'd spend that money on a safety again, but he was, along with Tyrann Mathieu, who's now 30 years old. And I think there's some debate about if he's the same player that he was a few years back. And the other one being Jesse Bates, the great Bengals safety who got the franchise tag. Those were the 3 considered the consensus best safeties on this free agent market. So I figured the Ravens would play a little more market ball there in terms of that and maybe go for a cheaper option. But Marcus Williams is certainly highly thought of around the league. And we'll see if he takes the next step, because I know a lot of people in New Orleans were disappointed to lose him. And but that's the deal when you have the Saints cap picture. They get under the cap, but they end up losing guys like Marcus Williams or I guess Trey Hendrickson. So that's just the way it works. And the Ravens come away with a guy who's entering his prime, and looking like he's an ascending player. And guy in Morgan Moses who, oh yeah, talking about versatility or durability of tackles, I should say, not versatility. Morgan Moses hasn't missed a game since his rookie season back in 2014. So durability, concern with Ronnie Stanley, concern with Juwan James. Even Patrick McCary missed some games last year. Morgan Moses, a very durable player. So have to like that deal for 3 years, $15 million.
I tip my cap to George Kokinis on all this stuff when the pro personnel people get involved and they've scouted the whole league, and then they come back and say these are the targets in the same way that the draft, that they know the league, that they have to know the league. We put so much focus on the upcoming draft class, but in the building, they're trying to find guys in the league that can play. And no greater example of that is when you lose your secondary, you start losing guys and you have to go out on the street and figure out who the 68th best cornerback is who doesn't have a job and bring him in and have him play in week 8. And that's bound to I always feel good about the Ravens in the offseason because they do address needs. They do spend their money wisely. They do think about it a lot. They do have the same brain trust of people thinking about it. And then you go out there and Ronnie Stanley gets hurt and the whole secondary blows up and then Lamar can't play. And, all of that happens. But right now I'm like, I can legally wager on the Ravens to be a Super Bowl team right now. Like their chances better than Tom Brady. And I get that enthusiasm when they make these moves on St. Patrick's Day, right? Like, and this is how the league is interesting in that ways. This week will be fun for every fan. And then in a couple weeks, we're going to have a draft and it'll be fun for fans again then. But people right now are like, if you're a fantasy player or you really like the league, maybe you know who Marcus Williams is, or you followed the draft a couple of years ago when he came out of Utah, you'd know. But it's weird when they just anonymously sort of pick out a right tackle and a safety, and you're like, oh, where'd this guy come from? Oh, there's 31 other teams in the league that play, and they watch them all, and they pay attention to this. And when it comes time to spend their money, they go take a kid from New Orleans because they think their corners are going to play, right? I mean, they think that the back end is where the strength of the team needs to be.
Yeah, and it's been that the last few years. And I'll remind everyone, last year aside, because we know you get to the end of the season, Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey are gone, and Deshaun Elliott's gone, and Tavon Young is playing, but he's not the Tavon Young of 5 years before that. I mean, Anthony Averett was even hurt late in the season. I mean, you just look at that. That wasn't in no way was that how they designed it, how they drew it up. I mean, the guys they had playing out there were not just practice squad guys, but practice squad guys they had signed recently were playing out there. So I go back to 2019, 2020. And as much as we were talking about the pass rush then, that defense was not the reason those two teams fell in the postseason. It was the offense not being what it had been in the regular season. So I think their formula does work by and large. Wink Martindale had 3 top 10 defenses prior to last year. It's why I was so confused that Wink ended up being the guy that from a perception standpoint took the fall, really. I mean, that's why I kind of took that position. So they still need edge rushers. Let's be clear, they still have work to do, but you can only address one need, one position at a time. There are very few players out there where you can sign someone and say, all right, that addresses 2 positions. There are a handful of guys in the league like that, but by and large, you make the moves that you feel are one, presented to you, and 2, you feel you can maximize your value. And clearly, the Ravens have taken big financial swings at safety, and over the last 10 years, it's been a mixed bag at best. Eric Weddle is really the one significant signing at safety where I would say more good than bad. He worked out, even though that deal it was terminated in its final year. So, you mentioned Chuck Clark, but there have been a lot of whiffs and a lot of misses and some things you couldn't have predicted. The Earl Thomas stuff kind of topping the list as far as how bizarre it was. So, but clearly the Ravens value secondary play. They just do. And it's something that a lot of people feel strongly about. A lot of people in the analytics community feel strongly about. And that's not to say they don't need another pass rusher or 2 between free agency and the draft. And we'll see how that plays out. But clearly, this was a move made to right the wrong of 3 years ago in terms of just how bad that Earl Thomas deal turned out for everyone. So you like to see it, with Marcus Williams becoming the guy they think he can be and the guy that he's been in New Orleans. And I think with a $70 million contract, I think there's a thought of we love the player he was with the Saints, and we think there's more there. There's more meat on the bone there for him to become even better, and that's what the Ravens are betting on.
Luke Jones is here. He is there, out in Owings Mills in spirit, and sometimes in actual person. We're going to have a draft in a couple of weeks. It is free agent madness. All the breaking news will happen first on the WNST Tech Service. All brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Yes, I'm wearing my Costas shirt. We're going to be at Costas on Friday from 2 until 5 watching hoops. Non-Maryland related hoops, although there's some kids that grew up here that will be dribbling around as well. We'll be there from 2 until 5 or until I run out of crab melt, and have a good time. Wednesday, we're at Fadley's, Lexington Market. We're going to see the new market. We're in the old Lexington Market, but the new market's there. We're going to be sniffing around. I haven't been downtown. I'm actually going to the Hippodrome on Saturday night to see dear Evan Hansen as well. So as much as I told Johnny O last week when we had Jane Miller on, I get a hard time for moving to the county. I spent plenty of time in the city. So I'll be back in the city again this weekend, having a good time. I live 4 miles from the city line. It's crazy. People perception. It's like you being in Pennsylvania. You don't love Maryland. You don't love Baltimore. Luke, hang out and rest up. And at some point, baseball might even make some news. Are they signing Correa? Don't answer that. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking ridiculous rumors and Baltimore positive.